and welcome to what is the final panel session of today. I think there is a fireside chat after this, but this is the final panel session, and I think we've saved a really interesting and really exciting topic for our final conversation, because we are going to talk about cybersecurity. So innovation in cybersecurity, what's already happening in terms of kind of initiatives that are underway, but also where you think things might be changing and what that means both for staff, but also I think for countries in general in terms of their cyber strategies. We're going to follow a similar format. You should all be familiar with it now. I am going to introduce our three excellent speakers. I'm going to invite them all to set the scene with some opening remarks, and then it's over to all of you. And I'm sure you're going to bring the energy right up to the end of the conference with some great questions for our three speakers. And just to say, cyber covers such a broad range of issues. There is no question that you can ask that's a silly question on cyber. And I know we have people who think about cyber at the national level, but also if you have questions about what does cyber mean for me and my kind of cybersecurity issues on a day-to-day, this is also the panel to ask those questions to. So please don't be shy in terms of asking your questions. So first we will hear from Gemma Ungoid-Thomas, who is Director of State Threats and Cyber at the National Security Secretariat, which is part of the Cabinet Office here in the UK. Then we will hear from Anne Duncan, who is the Chief Information Officer at the Department of Energy, who's come all the way from the United States to talk to us today. And then we will hear from Martin Bauer, who is the Deputy Director for Securing Government Services at the Central Digital and Data Office in the UK. Over to you, Gemma.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much for having me along today. It's great to be here. I'll give you a couple of thoughts from how I see things from at the centre. So in the Cabinet Office, I am responsible for the National Cyber Strategy, which sets the kind of strategic direction for the UK. So that's both government and public sector, private sector cooperation. So we, at a macro level, set the kind of priorities of the areas that we want to focus on in terms of protection to the UK, but also how we can ensure we're harnessing all of the best opportunities and realising the ambition of the new tech that is coming through. So it's quite a broad remit, and recently my patch has expanded to cover quite a few of the emerging tech areas too. So it's sort of cyber, but much broader. We also, at the centre, step in if there's a national incident. So if there is a significant sort of cross-sector, huge cyber attack, that is where, at the Cabinet Office, I would convene through the COBRA structure, crisis management procedures to be able to deal with that. And you'll remember a few years ago, obviously, WannaCry was quite a big wake-up call for the country, the WannaCry virus against the NHS system. So we did quite a lot of coordination from the centre there, and we fed quite a lot of the lessons back into the new, as was then, the National Cybersecurity Centre, to ensure that those practices were sort of picked up and learnt through. So at the policy and strategy level, but also dealing with the occasional scary incident as well. So I think I'll just say a few things around some of the priorities that we're working to at the moment. Key to that is set out in the integrated review, which sets out the sort of political and strategic priorities of the government, which was published a couple of years ago, really had cyber at the centre of that in terms of how we harness opportunities, but also how we make the UK a harder operating environment for those who wish to do us harm. And key to all of the work going on that has flown from that into the National Cybersecurity Strategy and the government cyber strategy is about resilience. So we have multiple programs running which look to different levels of organisational readiness, preparedness, and also response to cyber attacks when they happen. And what really strikes me now is there's a lot of work underway and there's a lot of exercising underway, but with the scale and pace of the technological changes underway, which I'm sure you've all been discussing throughout the conference, loads of opportunities, but obviously a huge challenge with the pace, especially with regard to AI. That has pretty much lowered the barriers to entry for quite a lot of individuals, groups, organisations who wish to do harm. So there's a big area there around proliferation of cyber capabilities, which has kind of created a huge kind of attack vector in a way that we haven't seen before. But it works both ways, right? Because AI and tech also provides huge opportunities for network defenders. So actually, AI harnessed in the right way can help defend, and it can help kind of authenticate and look for malicious content. So it really is quite a mixed bag. And we want to make sure that we are making policy and interventions based on a really good understanding of that emerging tech, but also really alive to some of the risks that can pose. So a lot of the work that is running at the moment through the Cabinet Office with the National Cybersecurity Centre is really looking at how we can kind of harness those opportunities in a safe way. And there are a few programs that I might touch on if we get the chance through the Q&A. But that's really what I wanted to draw out first of all.
Fantastic, thank you. I mean, I think there might be questions, I think, just on the kind of, on that strategy kind of, as you've mentioned there, the tech is changing so fast. How is that changing the nature of the threats that we are facing? But as you said as well, because one of my questions was going to be, how's AI changing the landscape? But as you said, for every threat that it brings an opportunity to defend in a different way as well. So I think we can follow that up in the questions as well. Thank you so much, Gemma. Anne, coming over to you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll start by just giving you a little bit of sense of what we do at the Department of Energy, because we have this habit in the U.S. of naming departments to have nothing to do with what they do, or at least only a small part. For example, I would tell you the Department of Interior is actually a science agency, and excuse me, not Interior, Commerce. The Department of Commerce is actually a science agency, but you wouldn't think of it from their name, so you just never know. Anyway, Department of Energy, we do everything. We have 4 major missions. We do everything related to nuclear nonproliferation and nuclear weapons production, managing the stockpile of nuclear weapons. So we have 4 manufacturing plants spread across the U.S. that actual manufacture replacement nuclear weapons for the stockpile. We have our mission related to actual energy policy, which would be the thing that most likely to be we think of when we think of Department of Energy. We are working on policy to ensure the clean energy transition. We put grants out and loans out to companies to get them moving on that transition. Things like solar, wind, and geothermal, carbon capture, all those things. We also deliver power to the grid in most of the United States. We're responsible for taking bulk power that's sold by manufactured. Let me try that again. That's generated, I'm going to call it jet lag, that's generated by other parts of the U.S. government, the Army Corps of Engineers, the Bureau of Reclamation, Tennessee Valley Authority. They generate power. We sell that when we manage a great deal of the grid in the United States. And then lastly, but far from least, we have 17 national labs. We call that the engine of innovation for the U.S. government and sometimes the world. And we do basic and applied research across a wide variety of things, some of which have absolutely nothing to do with energy. So it's a fascinating part of our organization. So that's what we do at DOE. And my role as COE of DOE is to ensure that we have IT services, IT strategy, cybersecurity policy and strategy across all that varying mission, which goes from national security to open science. So I have folks on the same network who are dealing with nuclear secrets as are working with China. So it's a very interesting world to operate in from a cybersecurity standpoint. We're also responsible for managing, beyond traditional IT, managing spectrum across DOE. We're responsible for supporting DOE's position in spectrum management. And for those of you who don't know, spectrum is really important for things like managing the grid. Grid timing depends upon having dedicated access to a piece of spectrum so you can send signals across that and manage your grid. So those are the kinds of things we do in my organization and at DOE. And I think that when you look at cybersecurity and innovation, and apparently I'm responsible for the title, and I didn't even know it. But we do never want to waste a good crisis, as you said before we came up here. And so modernizing our cybersecurity is a great entrance into modernizing our technology, and also a great entrance into thinking about where our technology needs to go. I'll give you one example. We're spending a lot of time right now on high-performance computing cybersecurity. Cybersecurity for high-performance computing is different than the other things we do. For example, if you implement logging on a high-performance computing system, often that impedes your ability to do the kind of high-performance computing that you want to do. So how do you manage those key assets? And for us, we have 3 leadership computing programs around DOE. We have the fastest supercomputer in the world, which you probably may have heard already if you heard Brian Epley speak. That's Frontier at Oak Ridge National Lab. But we also use supercomputing beyond those leadership computing for our mission. And so we need to be able to manage those better. And we're convening folks from around the world this summer to talk about how you manage security in high-performance computing out of our Lawrence Livermore lab in California. So that's one example. Another one is simply as we think about how we modernize our infrastructure, how does security drive us to modernize our tools and capabilities faster than we might otherwise? How can we use it in that way? So I think I'll just put out those couple thoughts and let Martin go on.
And thank you so much. I mean, fascinating. I'm always fascinated when you talk about the huge remit, I think, of the Department of Energy. I mean, it's on a scale that's quite hard to kind of get your head around. But also, as you mentioned there, how do you make sure that your systems are secure when you're working from very top secret kind of issues right up to, as you say, those open kind of more research collaborations? And I'm interested, we'll come back to working with China, because I want to ask about working with other countries as well in the field of cybersecurity as well. And yes, the title might have interested people. So I think really interesting, because the frustration, that's been raised in quite a few of the sessions, in that we want to do all this modernization and digitalization, but some of the legacy systems that we have are getting in the way of, for example, adopting AI. And what you're saying is the urgency on security and making sure we have secure systems might be one way to get that kind of issue addressed. So really interesting to hear. Thanks, Anne. Martin, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd just like to say we're much more advanced in the UK than you are in the States. You name your departments misleading things. We just name our departments as acronyms. Yeah. And then we change them all around every few years. And it's just to throw off the adversaries. It's all the cyber thing.
Very good.
All right. So I'm Martin Bowyer. I work in the Cabinet Office as well. I'm part of the Central Digital and Data Office, and my role can be best described as being the glue, or sometimes the grease, between security and digital. I would tell you about all the things we do, but actually I got kind of caught by the title, so I'm going to go on a little flight of fantasy here about this title, how cybersecurity can unlock government transformation. I did put this together before I knew that Anne had actually coined the phrase, so she might be quite offended by some of this, but stay with me.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, so I must admit, this whole thing, how cybersecurity can unlock government transformation, it does sound a bit like a marketing slogan from a consultancy company, right? The sort of thing that when I was in that game, I'd have been past that on a Friday afternoon, and leadership would have gone, now sell £4 million of that by next Tuesday. And I'd have thought, oh, great, really? But I'm an engineer too, and I love unpacking problems and looking at them and analysing them, trying to get to what's really behind it. And when you do that with this statement, the pivot word is unlock. Now, I spend quite a lot of my time applying my quite broad shoulders and not inconsiderable weight to trying to get government to transform itself better and faster. So it got me thinking about what locks up government transformation. I hope you've got your bingo cards ready, because I have a list, right? See how many of these you identify with. Traditional thinking, hidebound attitudes, constraining contracts with long-term suppliers, not really understanding your starting point and how all the things in your organization are connected together. Because when it's been working for a few years, you just slightly forget how it's actually connected. We're also really good at stifling creativity, and I'm just going to do a little role play here. I've got a great idea. Got a business case? Yeah, here's a business case. Can you do another business case in this format? Okay. Can you do a full Green Book business case? Yeah, okay, fine. Is it in business planning? Well, no, not really. We haven't got resources or any money. We stifle creativity, right? And all these things add up to inertia, Newton's first law. We're really good at carrying on in the track that we started with and doing the same thing again next year. It takes a lot of effort to shove us out of that into new things. All right, so throwing away the bingo cards, did people identify with those? Give me some reaction. Yeah, okay. So how do we unlock it? What are the converse characteristics? Well, firstly, things like innovative thinking. We're at Innovate 24, I had to say that. Having open minds and a risk-conscious mindset. So something about agility and having supplier relationships that are worth more, that are deeper than the immediate contract. Having a really good understanding of where we are and where your organization needs to get to. And we need to encourage directed creativity. And to really unlock transformation, what we need is disruption, inevitability, forced change. And now the statement starts to make a lot of sense, right? Because cyber is all of these things. It's definitely innovative. It's a risk-based mindset. It's about knowing yourself as a target and what you need to protect. It requires creativity from everyone involved in it, and it's definitely a disruptor. And the thing is that cyber doesn't happen in a box marked cyber, right? Cybersecurity and reacting to cyber threat and context change hits every part of your organization. So cyber is a catalyst. All right, it's a nice hypothesis, Bowyer. Now prove it. So, cyber is innovative. Think about adversaries. They innovate all the time, and they do it at the speed of the digital economy. They change and adapt. Think about how ransomware has become ransomware plus hack and leak pretty much in the last year and a half. Think about access as a service, basically hacking for hire. That's a completely new business model for organized crime. Think about what we call kill chains, the thing where you take an exploit right over here and you chain it together with all sorts of new and innovative exploits to achieve an outcome over here. This stuff is amazing. It's so clever. And you think, how did you know when you were over there that you were going to end up over here and doing things like getting hold of all the clearance records for every employee of the US government, for example? And you've got to be really open-minded when you're an adversary, because think about phishing, right? Only about 0.001% of fishes are successful, something like that. It's a tiny, tiny number. Now, if I went to my boss and said, hey, I've got a great idea and it'll be successful 0.001% of the time, my boss would say, go away, come back when it's 70%. But adversaries don't, the cybercriminals don't. They go, all right, we'll just do it 100 million times and suddenly you get payback. It's a new way of looking at things. So if it's an arms race and you have to innovate or die, defenders must be innovative. So you've got to be fast. You've got to get there before the attacker does. You've got to hunt them down and shut them out by having a better understanding of your own world than they do. And the wonderful thing about cyber attacks is they're inevitable, right? No matter what you think, what you want, what you hallucinate, it will happen. And everything in cyber is a risk balance. Everything's a risk balance, whether you calculate it or not. And cyber makes you think the unthinkable all the time. Think about Maersk, Sony, the OPM I just mentioned, Hackney Council, right? There are organizations, to people in this room, your organizations, some of them have had to rebuild themselves based on the sudden realization that they're exposed to catastrophic cyber attacks. So cyber forces us to confront the dressing gown and carpet slippers of our comfortable existence. And I think we should embrace it, we should welcome it. Because if we do that, we can start to unlock our own transformation. So I think that is why cyber is the tip of the arrow.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Martin. Have you got a theatrical background?
Maybe do a bit of theatre.
I really like that, though, because I knew about cyber as maybe unlocking funding, but I really like the way that you've put it there, in that actually to defend against the innovation of attacks, because they're constantly changing, constantly moving with the technology that's changing. We have to be just as innovative, just as agile, just as quick to pivot in terms of defending those. And it forces us to confront some of those things that stop us being innovative, which actually has been the topic of a lot of the sessions throughout the day. You put it so well in the kind of carpet slippers and dressing gown, I think. But it's all that siloed thinking, the traditional ways of doing everything. We have to be different if we're going to get ahead of the game in terms of cyber security. So I am going to come to the audience in a minute, but I guess my first question, very obvious question back to all of you then, is do you think the civil service or the public service, are we ahead of the game? Is it possible to be ahead of the game? And to what extent is AI changing that game? That's my very easy question for all of you. I'll change the order a little bit, Anne. I'll come to you first. Do you think we can ever be ahead of the bad players in this space?
So I think we have to stay ahead of the bad guys. I mean, if you don't stay ahead of them, you lose, and we can't afford to lose. And so what you have to remember is every new technology will be used for good and for bad, whether it's AI or it's quantum computing or name the technology of the day. They'll all be used by the bad guys for bad, and so you have to figure out how to leverage those for good. So, I think that is the key for us, is that we have to find ways to adopt those new technologies quickly, learn how to use them to not only advance our productivity, but to defend our space from a cybersecurity standpoint. And I'll give you an example. With AI, you can't. I mean, we tend to be afraid, particularly in government, of these new technologies. Oh no, we can't use that. So we get these questions that sort of fascinate me from our legislators, and they start with, this is not a leading question at all. Have you locked down your sites so that no one can access ChatGPT? Now, clearly they don't have an agenda when they ask that question. They clearly don't have an opinion. And so I can say, sure, we've blocked ChatGPT, no one can use it. Great. Then we don't learn from ChatGPT. We don't know how to defend ourselves. We don't know what's in ChatGPT that might be a risk to us. We just lock it up. So instead, we have to look at that and say, how do we securely use these new technologies? So for example, with AI, maybe we don't want to use public AI. We want to get our own private instances so we can protect and control our information. But that still lets us test out AI. That still lets us figure out how we get value out of that, and we can use those technologies without putting our data at risk. I'll also add, from DOE's standpoint, we then do research. So the research side of DOE would be researching how to best use AI, how to advance the state of AI. So we have to look at both from our standpoint, our users and our researchers, and how do we make them safe and productive so we can get the value of those tools and protect the enterprise.
Thanks. And Gemma, the same question to you in terms of how do we get ahead of the game on this?
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of the threat landscape, I mean, when you look at AI, I don't think it's massively changed. I think it's sort of amplified the existing risks that we have known about, and the pace and scale of it will increase clearly. If you look at ransomware as a problem set, AI has then just made their business model a lot easier. So it's then going to lead to a wave of more of that coming. In terms of how you get ahead of it, well, the new tech is it's quite scary. There's a lot coming through, and we've known about some of this for some time, and we've been doing work and preparing. But it actually doesn't change the fact that the core basics will still protect quite a lot of the networks from these sorts of basic attacks. So getting the basics right. So the National Cybersecurity Centre, Cyber Essentials, making sure that organisations are adopting all of the basic cyber hygiene remains so important to stopping the vast majority of these things taking root. But I think fundamentally, in order to kind of harness the opportunities from all of this, and the Prime Minister has been very clear that a lot of the tech will provide benefits to the economy, and we have to use this in a very clear-eyed way. In order to do that, we need to partner with industry. Now, we have various initiatives where we would like to collaborate, and it's great to be at this sort of event this week. It's a really good example of that. But having that really open conversation with the companies that are developing the tech to say, look, what more can we do to secure by design at the beginning, at the software level, for example, to ensure that then by the time it gets to the user point of view, some of this risk has sort of been minimized as far as possible. So I think that partnership and that collaboration with industry is going to become even more important.
Thanks. Martin, your thoughts?
If I said we're ahead of the game all the time, you'd know I was lying, because if that was the case, we wouldn't have cyber attacks. However, we are ahead of the game some of the time, and the great thing, you've got UK and US represented here. We are amongst the leading nations in terms of protecting government from cyber threat. Unfortunately, we're also, because we're in that position, we're aware of just how vulnerable we are as well. So that's the generic answer. when it comes to AI, I think this is a really interesting one. Quite often, we have this debate, usually over a beer, in the security world, of going, we never really got on top of that cyber risk before it kind of happened and hit us. With every new wave of technology that's come along, I think AI is different. We've known it's coming for quite a while. Cyber companies have been using AI in the terms of machine learning and deep learning and other techniques for a very long time. So we've been talking about this for a long time. We're going into it very much with our eyes open. If you look at the generative AI framework for government, which was published recently, you will find a pretty in-depth security section there. That's backed up by a community of about 80 people now across government who are looking at how we secure AI in government. So we've got a long way to go, and we don't have any kind of amazing jump on the rest of the world in this, but oh boy, have we got our eyes open around it.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Okay, I'm going to come over to the audience. Yes, we've got gentlemen here, if we could get, and then we've got a question at the back. So I'm going to take these two first. Thanks.
Thank you. I thought it was really interesting how you said we have to forever be looking forward with everything that's changing. Flipping on its head slightly, do you think there's a danger by looking so far forward we forget to look behind? And what I mean by that is, a lot of the most important UK infrastructure and America is built on legacy systems. As time moves forward, this knowledge, this experience is slowly dying out or leaving us, particularly when we rely on third-party companies when it becomes no longer cost-effective for them to maintain the service. How do you protect the older systems? How do you stop every old trick becoming new again? Because the longer you wait, the more expensive it becomes, so it becomes a very difficult situation. And then how do you protect product knowledge or risk knowledge within the organization as people move on and as everything, departments change, name and everything, and it all just starts all over again?
Great question. So as we look ahead to new systems coming in, do our legacy systems become even more vulnerable? Martin, we'll go this way on that one.
Yes. I'll expand on that. So in CGDO, we own something called the Legacy Framework, which was a piece of work that looked at all the sort of legacy we have across government. Over the last 3 years, we invested quite a lot of Treasury money in trying to fix some of that legacy. But even though that was a large amount of money, it didn't touch the sides. So in the centre, and every CIO will recognise this, you have a constant battle over basically money you regret, right? Money you pour into securing, maintaining, keeping legacy going, because it's really hard to get rid of legacy, and what everyone actually wants in the new and cool and new policies and everything else, right? You have to fight that battle all the time, and I think it's incumbent on us in the centre to keep banging that drum, right? It doesn't matter how good your defences are for the rest of the organisation. If you've got something horrific legacy sat there, and I've been involved in more instances of this than I can count, it's a way in. It's an easy way in. We can't take our eye off that ball. You're absolutely right.
Thanks. And does this go back to you giving the session its title in a way, in terms of having to upgrade your legacy systems?
Yeah, in a way. And I mean, it's funny because as you were saying that, I was thinking, well, we don't have to worry about the companies that built it because all this old stuff, we built it ourselves. But that's not entirely true because obviously there's underlying technologies there, and in many cases, the providers of those underlying technologies do disappear. But yeah, we cannot look at the new shiny object and build new things to the detriment of managing our legacy applications. And one huge example, because you mentioned infrastructure, I'll give you is the power marketing administrations, which are the part of DOE that manages much of the grid. And we have a lot of OT systems out there that are very old, and the replacing OT systems on an operating power grid takes a lot of time, and so how do we secure those against threats that were not even imagined when those came along? We have the same issue with nuclear power plants. We run some nuclear reactors at DOE. How do we ensure those are protected against threats that weren't considered? And you can have a debate about air gapping. If air gapping is 100% effective, it works. But I would argue that you can't guarantee your air gapping is going to be 100% effective. So that can only be one of your solutions towards defense in depth. So part of the issue, to your point, is you've got to get rid of some of these technologies because you're running out of people who know how to fix those, how to upgrade them, how to maintain them. You're running out of vendors sometimes who know how to do them. But also, we not only need to manage the resource issue, but also we simply need to move on to new technologies that cost us less to run and maintain while being inherently more secure because they were built in a modern way with security by design. So, no, we can't forget about it. We've got to do it. The money's not always there, which is why we get back to cybersecurity and saying, don't waste a good crisis, use security as the tip of the spear to get in there.
Thanks. And Emma, this question, I'm just wondering if it comes back to what you said at the beginning about your focus is still on cyber hygiene and making sure the basics are covered.
Totally, and I think, fundamentally there's no easy answer to legacy IT. But we do need to learn the lessons. I also think I totally agree with the comments sort of made there. I think it is the basics. It's ensuring that the SOC and your technical teams who understand this talk to the procurement teams. I think there's even now, there's still very sort of big silos in organizations. So, stuff is being procured that isn't even up to standard or, has sort of basic levels of hygiene in it. So I think making sure that teams are talking together, collaborating, and another way is just making sure that, at board level, this is properly considered as any other business risk. It gets the airtime, seniors are focused on it, and also they are, made to be intelligent customers to ensure that the kit programs, everything's being procured on a very good basis. And then if all else fails, just making sure that you have a plan in place for, not if but when there is inevitably going to be, a problem with it. And if there is a plan in place that's being properly exercised and everyone understands their roles and responsibilities, government isn't going to come riding in and save the day, by the way. The National Cybersecurity Centre sets a really good framework and standards and advisories, but really the risk is to be managed by organisations. But just ensuring all of those basics in place, will really help.
Yeah, thanks. We had a question at the back, and then I'll come to the audience for another question after this. So, question at the back.
So, I've always been interested in cybersecurity, and I would just like to know your thoughts on including into the cybersecurity defense ways in which to attack and even get people with that mindset to work with to get ahead of the people outside coming up with them first. It was just something interesting. I know there have been talks about approaches like that, but I wanted to get your opinion, especially after the answer you gave about old systems, going out of not being defendable enough. But then, wouldn't that also be an argument that if people forget about them, maybe even the attackers wouldn't know how to attack them because they're too old?
If only.
Okay, you probably understand this question more than me, I think. So how do we get on the attack, you're saying, so that actually a more proactive approach on this? And you're nodding. I'm going to come to you first.
Oh, that was not what that nod was about. I was listening to you. Yeah, so legally I'm not allowed to attack. So I will be clear, there are some people within the U.S. government who are legally allowed to do some more offensive things, but for the most part, we don't do offensive cyber, and there's reasons for that. I think you make yourself a much bigger target when you take on offensive cyber, and I won't get into it much deeper than that. But I think doing exercises where you get into the mindset of the attacker is absolutely a worthwhile exercise. So, no pun intended, exercises. But I think, so when you do, for example, red team, blue team, purple team exercises, having your teams do that red teaming to understand how the attackers are thinking is useful. But I think it can be a dangerous path to go down to actually do offensive cyber.
I am going to put the question to both of you, but on that question, I just want to build on that, because one thing that we've had sessions where we've talked about diversity of thought and bringing in the broadest possible skill set for innovation. And I just wonder whether in the cybersecurity world, whether we reach out to people who, I'm not saying they've been bad players themselves, but they kind of understand that world somehow. Do we bring them in as experts into the civil service? So I'll add that in to the question as well, if that's all right. Martin, I'm going to come to you and then...
Okay, yeah. Jim will give you the answer from the kind of strategic level. I'll give you a practical answer, which is I encourage people in my teams to understand how an attacker works and thinks, right? So, practical example, one of the things I do is I run .gov.uk, and it turns out that domain hijacks are a really beautiful way to carry out cyber attacks, because if you own someone's domain, you own them completely. So I encourage that team, and they are brilliant, to explore all the different ways that you can carry out a domain hijack. And we know of about 140, 150 different types. Right? That's more, actually, than most other governments do and most of the kind of open source internet does, because we've looked at it. And our defense in that world and our detection in that world is much better as a result of it. So I absolutely encourage it. I love red teaming. I love purple teaming. I think anyone who works around cybersecurity who isn't purely in a kind of compliance mindset should absolutely spend some time looking at that and thinking about how to be an attacker, how to get into an attacker's head.
So can you there might be some people like me who aren't experts in the room. Red teaming, purple teaming, what, in layman's terms, what exactly is that?
All right, so the simplest explanation is that they are where you attack a friendly target, right? So you're going in, rather than carrying out a very straightforward textbook type, I'm going to check this, then check this, then check this. What you do is you go, okay, I'm an attacker. I'm going to attack your organization. Right, what am I going to do? I'm going to start looking, I'm going to do my research, I'm going to do all my reconnaissance stuff, I'm going to start hitting your digital footprint with all kinds of different boring commoditized attack, just because actually I know that sooner or later I'm going to find something that works. When I'm inside, I'm going to start moving around inside your network. I'm going to behave like an adversary. So that's red teaming. Purple teaming, in simplistic terms, is I'm doing that, but I'm sitting alongside your cyber defenders as well. Okay. So we're actually working together. We might be being deliberately noisy, because I want the SOC, the cyber professionals in that organization to actually see what we're doing, right? I want to knock on the door real loud. I might be knocking on the door really loud over here and doing something really sneaky over here. But that's the point. You're actually working as an attacker to actually really test an organization. The reason it exists is because people got very hidebound into a compliance mindset. It's all about controls and compliance. And the attackers just went, I don't care, I'm going around that way. Mm-hmm. So that's the beauty of that red teaming. And I think every cyber professional needs some of, it might not be a technical skill, but at least a knowledge of how that attacker thinks is really important. Does that answer the question?
Yes, very well. Thank you. Gemma, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I would add that we ensure that diversity of thought and critical challenge is completely baked into all of the sort of processes that we definitely run from the centre. And I know that the NCSC and GCHQ also adopt that mindset with everything they do. One thing I would mention is obviously we've been watching and supporting through various cyber capacity building programs Ukraine over not just the last couple of years, actually for a decade, capacity building in the region. And since Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, we have, of course, been providing various forms of support. We've also been learning the lessons of what we have seen there in a cyber context, right? So we are making sure that we are feeding back any tools, tactics, and methods that we have seen through the particularly destructive sort of cyber attacks actually could have been a lot worse than they actually were. But Ukraine had quite good sort of cyber defense programs running for a number of years, which kind of like minimized the sort of worst of that. But we definitely looked at some of the more destructive attacks around their critical national infrastructure, and just as a basic rule, made sure that they were fed back into our program. So we look very closely at the tools and tactics of adversaries, and we definitely do learn from them.
Thanks. Yes, we've got a question down here, if we can get, and then one at the back for the next question. Thanks.
Okay, so I was in cyber for 10 years and in 2 different departments, and cyber is everywhere, but is there a blind spot when it gets up into the sort of senior management team? We had a minister in my department who used his own phone, and then in another department, the chair used her own computers, which got hacked. And Is it a blind spot?
Thank you. Really good question. So it's at senior levels, both official and political. Is there something more that we need to do?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. I think in some ways cyber has been like a really galvanizing force, but in other ways it's kind of created it as a thing over there that is about security. And me as an individual citizen, business owner, it's kind of somebody else is going to look after that, right, if it breaks. And I think we're definitely in the market for more innovative thinking about how we reach people. There are various programs running, public information campaigns, cyber aware, and those sorts of things. But in terms of adoption of some of the basic measures, we're really keen to understand, like, what are the barriers to that? Why are boards not talking about this and considering it as a main business risk? Why are people not asking more questions about their own personal devices and their own data? So really, really good question. I know the National Cybersecurity Centre are also thinking about a toolkit for CEOs, just to kind of like really standardise how the risk management process of that is working. Totally agree, though. In some ways, it's probably quite heretical, but we almost need to kind of get rid of the word cyber.
Yes.
In some ways. Like, it's been a huge vanguard of effort and focus, but it's also kept it, I think, in some ways as a thing over there. But maybe that's a bit controversial.
Thanks, Anne.
Yeah, so I think the blind spot can be at any level. I do think that you always run the risk the blind spots at senior level, because that person can kind of go, no, I'm not going to do this. We had a very senior leader in DOE recently who did that to our team. They came in to set her up with some of her new security things, and she said no. And we just went back and we sent someone else to talk to her and to understand what the problem was. And it was, this individual thought, well, I'm going to get my PIV card, which is your card that you use to plug in your computer, and I'm still going to have to use my RSA token, and I don't want to have to do both of them. And once we explained, no, that's not this complicated, individual's completely on board. So I think there can be a blind spot, but I think as IT cybersecurity professionals, it's our job to not take no for an answer from those folks, to help them understand. I mean, I had a boss in a previous administration whose email got exposed through a hack of another senior political leader elsewhere in the government. And I had to explain to her what had happened to her email and why this had happened and what went wrong. So, it's a learning opportunity as well to say this is what happens when you don't follow. And then those folks can often become your biggest advocate. DOE is essentially a science and engineering agency, so we do pretty well that most of our folks understand and get it. But those risks can come at all levels, and it's usually important to try and close off those blind spots.
Thanks. Martin, I know we've got a lot of other questions, so just briefly on this one, then we'll go to the other.
Astonishingly, I'm going to do a nuanced answer. 5 years ago, it was barely talked about at board level, really, and we've spent a lot of time and effort trying to do that. Now, it absolutely gets discussed at board level. I've sat in the civil service board and where people talk about it as a strategic issue. So there's no blind spot up there with it as a kind of enterprise issue. There is a blind spot, I think, when you come a bit further down and you try and work out where it sits in overall priorities of an organization, right? So when you're going, okay, you're all talking about it, that's great. Now when you come down and I want effect, that I think is where it's not a blind spot so much as it just gets gridlocked. There's another point, which is, you mentioned ministers. So all ministers do get cyber briefings now, right? That almost universally. It's something I've done myself. So they absolutely get the briefings. It's also true, though, that if you understand it as a kind of enterprise issue, something abstract, how you interpret what it means to you personally depends on your own personal experience. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't necessarily make it drink. So that perhaps is more variable.
Thanks. I think we had two. I'm going to take both the questions that were at the back there, I think. So, yes. Yep.
Hi. Thank you so much for the talk. It's been really interesting. My question is more around third-party risk and people who we may allow partial access to our systems. Particularly, you mentioned around collaborators in research spaces, which are more known for the kind of cyber attacks and vulnerabilities. So really curious about your insights there.
Another great question. So people that work with us sometimes and we collaborate with, what's the risk there? And then we'll take the second question, and we've got 4 minutes left. Yeah.
Okay, hi. I was just wondering, for the topic there, do you feel that although we get all this advice from NCSC on how we should treat and deal with cybersecurity, we then have to produce that into policy? Is the time that it takes to produce that policy for each of the department delaying how cybersecurity can help to unlock government transformation?
So again, the time that we take, are things moving too fast? So you can answer one or both of those questions, and we've got 3 minutes left. And I'll start with you then, Martin, and Gemma, I'll give you the last say.
So I'll do the third-party risk because that is right in our wheelhouse. So yes, we have all these research organizations. We have user facilities, which are the primary way that we work with folks outside of DOE. And those are things like supercomputers, linear accelerators, other light sources, these nuclear reactors, these big tools that we allow people access to run experiments. And so we have to figure out how to manage access for people to ensure that those folks aren't a backdoor in for others. And we do find, particularly from some countries, that those researchers don't have the same expectations of how to behave with our resources as we do. We've had experiences with researchers from certain countries sharing their credentials with other researchers and letting them access to our systems. So where we can, when we're talking about U.S. citizens or other folks who we can clear from a security standpoint, we issue them very specific credentials that allow us to know who they are and that they're cleared. Other folks, we're going to work with them in giving them limited access to resources. Sometimes they aren't allowed to directly run their jobs on our system. They may have to be reviewed first. In other cases, we're going to have them work in a DMZ kind of zone in themselves. So we find ways to look at our security layers to try and make sure that we're giving the right access to people, because there is a huge risk for those third-party users.
Thanks. Over to you.
I'll do policy then. We often say in government digital and data that government operates at 2 speeds, right? There's traditional speed and there's digital speed. And it can be very frustrating for those of us in digital and cyber and everything else when we get effectively stuck waiting for things to happen at the more traditional, slower speed. Now, actually, there's a benefit to the slower speed sometimes because it can stop us doing crazy things. But at the same time, it can be immensely frustrating, and I don't think we've found the right balance yet.
Thank you. Last words to you, Gemma.
I do a plug on the third-party collaboration. I do a plug for the National Protective Security Agency. I've just put out some really good advice around collaborating with third parties, particularly on R&D, and they've done some really good advice around doing that safely, securely, to ensure IP is protected. So plug there, check that out. That's really, really useful. And then on pace, well, yes, that don't disagree with anything there. But again, I think whilst the threat is sort of changing and accelerating with the tech, it goes back to getting the basics right and having core resilience work strands running properly, coherently will tackle quite a lot of this at root.